HBO Max has a terrific selection of both classic and contemporary thrillers, so if you're looking for something that will keep you on the edge of your seat, look no further. We're keeping an eye on everything on the service, bringing you the best in psychological suspense, conspiracies, and battles of will. If it's got tension, overwhelming odds, or ordinary people in extraordinarily dangerous situations, we know it'll make for a great movie night. And there should be something here for everyone. Edith Piaf's life and music were filled with sadness, tragedy, glamour, and triumph. So quintessentially French, it can be placed in a box with baguettes, berets, and the Eiffel Tower. Coming in at just 4 feet 10 inches, Ed Sullivan called her the most amazing 97 pounds in the business, notes the Wall Street Journal. She started singing from the time she was a little girl and did not quit until she took her last breaths. Once she started working professionally in clubs, she wore a simple black dress that became her signature look for the rest of her career. So pop some popcorn, pull the shades, and get ready for some dark and heart-pounding entertainment. Updated on July 16, 2021. HBO Max is always updating its streaming library, and we'll make sure that this article stays current with the best the service has to offer. Unlike most chanteuses, she was not conventionally good-looking. We refresh this selection every month, adding new must-sees and sometimes rotating in other classics by major thriller directors like Alfred Hitchcock. Beautiful, sure, but she was morose, and her music told tragic tales of poor women, and lost love. Because, let's face it, basically every Hitchcock movie could earn a spot on this list. Argo. During the Iran hostage crisis, 6 U.S. citizens escape the American embassy and take shelter with the Canadian ambassador. Most of the songs were inspired by her own life. CIA exfiltration expert Tony Mendez hatches a plan to get them out of the country by having them pretend to be a movie production team scouting locations for Argo, a cheesy science fiction movie. Substantiating their cover story is fun, but getting them out of Iran could still get them killed. All the details have to hold, and no one can slip up. Her most famous song, Non, Je ne regrette rien, no, I regret nothing, embodies the irony of her life and image as someone who truly lived, but to her own demise. Edith Piaf was raised in a brothel. Myth and reality are often entangled when it comes to Edith Piaf's childhood because her life sounded like a fable. It has been said Piaf was born in the streets of Belleville, a working-class neighborhood on the edge of Paris. People interpreted this as if her mother gave birth to her on the actual pavement. It all leads to an unbelievably tense sequence at the airport with everything on the line. The fake movie conceit gives Argo the rollicking entertainment of a heist movie, with plenty of humor, and the contrast only makes the straightforward suspense scenes more compelling. Starring Ben Affleck, Bryan Cranston, Alan Arkin. Director Ben Affleck. Year 2012. Runtime 120 minutes. Rating R. Rotten Tomatoes score 96%. Blood Simple. A setup that feels like the start of a standard private eye movie goes wrong in Blood Simple. Marty hires an investigator, Lauren Visser, to tail his wife, as she's having an affair with Ray, who works at Marty's bar. In truth, she was born in a hospital like most babies. When Visser gets the proof, Marty offers Visser more money to kill them. But while Visser accepts, it turns out that he has other plans, ones that will leave Ray and Abby alive, at least for now, but plunge them into a dark vortex of horror and increasing complications. Unlike other children, she was born to traveling circus performers. This nightmarish twist on the genre is the Coen brothers' first film, and it already shows all the earmarks of their greatness. Starring John Getz, Frances McDormand, Dan Hedaya. Director Joel Coen. Year 1984. Runtime 95 minutes. Rating R. Rotten Tomatoes score 94%. Diabolique. French thriller Diabolique starts off with an unusual murder plot. Michel, headmaster of a boys' boarding school, is sadistic and petty, and his wife, Christina, and mistress, Nicole, bear the brunt, and bruises, of it all. Her father was an acrobat and her mother, a singer. Against all odds, the two are friends, and fragile, tender-hearted Christina and bold, icy Nicole console each other. They also plan Michel's murder. But after they've killed him, the tension doesn't go away, it just gets more nightmarish. According to the New York Times, her mother deserted her after 2 months and she lived for 2 years with her maternal grandmother in wretched conditions of filth and neglect. According to No Regrets, The Life of Edith Piaf, when Piaf's father returned from fighting in World War I, he saw the condition his daughter was living in.
He moved Piaf to live with his mother, who ran a brothel. His body disappears, and people report having talked with him. And Christina is starting to crack under the pressure. Diabolique has a plot that even Hitchcock might have envied. and it also features one of the most iconic reveals in cinema history. There's definitely at least one scene here that you'll never forget. Starring Simone Signoret, Vera Clouzot, Paul Meurice director, Henri-Georges Clouzot year, 1955 runtime, 116 minutes rating. TVMA Rotten Tomatoes score, 96%. Disturbia Kale Brecht reacts badly to a teacher bringing up his dead father, so badly that he hits him and winds up under house arrest. Without much to do, he finds himself getting obsessed with watching his neighbors, especially Robert Turner, who lives next door and who has a possible link to a string of murders. This was where another myth was born. Cale and his friends, Ashley and Ronnie, keep prying into the strange happenings over at Turner's, and their deepening involvement puts them in more and more danger. Because now, Turner knows they're watching. It was said that Piaf was blind, and that the prostitutes made a pilgrimage to pray to Saint Therese to make Piaf see again. Soon after, her eyesight was restored, miraculously. Later it was learned that Piaf was taken to a doctor who diagnosed her with acute keratitis, an inflammation of the cornea caused by the herpes virus or bacteria. The condition was treated with proper medication. She began singing in the streets at age 14. By age 8, Edith Piaf went to live with her father. This Rear Window homage does a great job revisiting classic themes and adding its own twist. Starring Shia LaBeouf, David Morse, Sarah Romer director, DJ Caruso year, 2007 runtime, 104 minutes rating. PG-13 Rotten Tomatoes score, 69%. The grifters Lily Dillon, a seasoned grifter and low-level hustler for the mob, raised a grifter son, Roy. They traveled with a circus for a time, but soon her father, not one for commitments, quit and they traveled around the country. According to Provence Wine Zine, at age 14, in 1929, young Piaf began working with her father in his street performances. The relationship between the two is difficult and complicated, and that only amps up when Lily meets Roy's new girlfriend, Myra, who isn't adverse to running a few cons herself. He did his death-defying contortions, and Piaf closed out with a song. Long before her father took her back, she began singing in the streets of Bernay. Per No Regrets, her mystique began when she sang on tables at the local Café de la Gare. One neighbor commented that, her voice was already unique, magical. Piaf claimed her blindness played into her ability to sing, saying, "When I wanted to understand, to see, a song, I would close my eyes." Over time, she developed her own repertoire of songs. At age 16 she began working without her father. Piaf worked with a younger acrobat, a girl Knnown as Momone. In fact, she wants Roy's help with one, even though it's decidedly out of his wheelhouse. A warped, poisonous love triangle ensues as Lily and Myra vie for Roy's loyalty and cooperation and, more importantly, for the upper hand, a tussle that's sure to have fatal consequences. Terrific lead performances and some unabashed darkness and sleaze make this a modern noir classic. Starring John Cusack, Angelica Houston, Annette Bening director, Stephen Frears year, 1990 runtime, 110 minutes rating. Our Rotten Tomatoes score, 91%. Insomnia LAPD detective Will Dormer and his partner assist with a murder case in a small Alaskan town, and it's a good time for Dormer to be away since he's also under investigation himself. But things only get worse. They performed in the streets and army barracks. While making a life for herself, she met a young man named Louis DuPont and became pregnant. Early in the case, in a confusing, foggy firefight, he accidentally kills his own partner, and he knows it will look like murder. According to Provence Wine Zine, at 17, she gave birth to her only child Marcel, who died 2 years later to meningitis. Piaf left DuPont and continued to sing with Momone in the streets and at a seedy club called Lulu's. She was accused of murder while singing near the Arc de Triomphe. A passerby heard Edith Piaf singing, "Comme un moineau," which translates to, like a sparrow. The man's name was Louis Leplay, and he would be the one to give her stage name, La Môme Piaf, the little sparrow, Piaf, being slang for sparrow. He covers up his involvement, but that just opens the door for an elaborate game with the man he's chasing. Leplay owned an upscale cabaret near the Champs-Élysées called La Gurnese. He paid her 40 francs a night and helped to shape her image. Who knows the truth about what just went down? Their unsettling phone calls, the constant Alaskan daylight, the guilt, and a near-total lack of sleep all begin to eat away at Dormer, making him more and more unstable as a final confrontation approaches. According to No Regrets, He would present her not as a glamorous chanteuse, but as herself. The contrast between her childlike mien and her assaultive vibrato would move audiences as it moved him. Within the year, Piaf became a sensation, playing on the radio, seeing her name in the newspapers, acting in films, and recording an album. While in Cannes for a charity ball, Lepley was robbed and murdered in Paris. Despite being nowhere near the scene of the crime, she was arrested and questioned, but later released. Insomnia features a great, haggard Al Pacino and an unusually serious and horrifying turn from Robin Williams, but we still have to give top billing to the setting and atmosphere. According to the Travel Geek, the police thought that by working in the La Gurnese, Piaf brought the attention of her friends in the street mafia to the establishment. Piaf often dated and hung around with the milieu, the French mafia, something prostitutes and Piaf did for protection while working and living in the tougher parts of town. Although she was found innocent, it put a stain on her career. Her career took off just as Germany invaded in the 1930s. The Great Depression was making its way to France, just as Edith Piaf was coming of age and striking out on her own. You can almost feel the doom. Starring Al Pacino, Robin Williams, Hilary Swank. Director Christopher Nolan. Year 2002. Runtime 118 minutes. Rating R. Rotten Tomatoes score 92%. Michael Clayton. Law firm fixer Michael Clayton finds himself in deep and dangerous waters when he's supposed to contain Arthur, an attorney in the middle of both a mental breakdown and crisis of conscience. She saw protests and political heat around her but was too busy with her voice. Arthur has been representing U North, an agricultural conglomerate, in a class action suit, and U North, embodied by anxious, ruthless in-house lawyer Karen Crowder, is deeply worried by what an unleashed Arthur might say if he starts talking. According to No Regrets, Piaf wrote to a friend, saying, "I've decided to be serious and work hard to please my dear old Papa Lepley." She broke ties with the mafia and began focusing on her career, this time under the tutelage of lyricist Raymond Asso. Then they find out he has an incriminating document that could flatten U North if it ever gets out, and all bets are off. She became his Pygmalion, being taught proper diction and etiquette. While Michael is trying to resolve the situation his way, Karen is starting to come up with her own, more violent solutions. He wrote songs for her and helped keep her away from her troublesome friends. This gripping legal thriller fires on all cylinders, as effective as it is hauntingly plausible. Starring George Clooney, Tom Wilkinson, Tilda Swinton. Director Tony Gilroy. Year 2007. Runtime 119 minutes. Rating R. Mulholland Drive. Surreal and genre-defying, Mulholland Drive begins with a woman escaping a car crash. She began booking major venues and cabarets and recording new songs. Asso had a tight rein on Piaf's career, telling her where to sing, what to sing, and even how to spend her money. Terrified and confused, she has no memory of who she is or what's happened to her. In August of 1939, he was drafted into the army. So she takes refuge with Betty, an idealistic young woman who's come to Hollywood to start an acting career. Betty and Rita, who names herself after Rita Hayworth, start digging, but the answers they find are far from reassuring. They trace the only name Rita remembers, Diane Selwyn, to an apartment with a dead woman inside. By September, Germany declared war on France. Piaf kept working. In 1940, a sign of her established fame, the playwright Jean Cocteau wrote a play, La Belle Indifferente, for her, about her, and starring her. By June, the Nazis had placed their flag over the Arc de Triomphe. And that's only the first layer of this beautifully nightmarish drama, which soon gets into a deeper, or different, story of lovers Diane and Camilla. Or are they Betty and Rita? Starring Naomi Watts, Laura Elena Herring, Justin Theroux. Director David Lynch. Year 2001. Runtime 147 minutes. Rating R. Rotten Tomatoes score 83%. Mystic River. Estranged friends Sean, Dave, and Jimmy all reunite after the horrific murder of Jimmy's teenage daughter, Katie. Sean is the cop assigned to investigate, and Dave, who still carries the childhood trauma of his own kidnapping and abuse, is slowly surfacing as a suspect and psychologically unraveling at the same time. Jimmy has lived a clean life for years, but with the need to avenge his daughter, he slips back into the power plays and violence that made him an effective neighborhood gangster. The three men are destined to collide, but what will happen when they do? And who really killed Katie? The layered mystery here is intriguing, but it's the character work that really makes the movie shine. Starring Sean Penn, Tim Robbins, Kevin Bacon. Director Clint Eastwood year, 2003 runtime, 137 minutes rating. Rotten Tomatoes score, 88%. North by Northwest, is essential viewing if you like ordinary people forced into extraordinary and bizarre predicaments. According to Music and the Holocaust, she had to register with the German propaganda department and agree to have her song lyrics vetted, but the Nazis liked her and she was encouraged in her work. The French accused her of siding with Nazi Germany. The fact that Edith Piaf continued working throughout World War II was enough to make French countrymen and women give her some serious side-eye. It even packs in at least 2 famous action sequences. Roger Thornhill finds himself in over his head when he's kidnapped and brought to a luxurious mansion. Interrogated and menaced by men who suspect him to be someone he's not, he's soon set up to die in a drunk driving accident. German soldiers attended her performances, and she was popular with Nazi leaders. And when he survives and tries to find out what's going on, everything has been masterfully covered up, to the point where it seems like he's losing his mind. While Nazi censors vetted her songs and would not play those written by Jewish lyricists, some fell through the cracks. Soon, Thornhill is framed for murder and on the run, and his only ally is Eve Kendall, a woman he's just met, and he might not be able to trust her. He has to try to clear his name. If he can even stay alive long enough to do it. Starring Cary Grant, Eva Marie Saint, James Mason director, Alfred Hitchcock year, 1959 runtime, 136 minutes rating. TVPG Rotten Tomatoes score, 97%. Presumed innocent prosecutor Rusty Sabak winds up on the wrong side of a murder trial when his colleague, Carolyn, is murdered. Rusty once had an affair with Carolyn, and that, combined with a mounting pile of evidence, quickly makes him a top suspect. For example, according to Music and the Holocaust, her song, Il n'est pas distingué, it is not distinguished, has the lyrics, I can't stand Hitler. The Nazis seem to forget that we were the people who slammed them in the First World War. Piaf protected 2 Jewish musicians, Michel Elmer and Norbert Glansberg, whom she helped to go into hiding. She inadvertently assisted the resistance movement by living in a home where many Jewish men and women hid. Rusty works to prove his innocence, but it's a tough job, especially in the middle of mounting scrutiny and a political firestorm. She went on a tour that ultimately was a covert undercover operation. He may well be sacrificed to protect his boss, especially given the pending election. Her photos with the French prisoners in the audience was then used to make 120 fake passports that many of them used to escape. Per Music and the Holocaust, she continued to sing at prison camps at her own initiative even when resistance activities were not being carried out, and it will never be quite clear whose morale, the Nazis or the prisoners, she was hoping to boost. Edith Piaf failed with American audiences after the war. Purge panels were formed to question those who may have appeared sympathetic to Germany. Edith Piaf's music was banned by this panel. And even as we're wondering whether or not he'll be successful at saving his reputation, we also have to wonder whether he really is innocent after all. After pleading her case, telling them about her efforts to help the resistance, she was released and free to perform once again, via No Regrets. By this time Piaf was 30 years old, famous, controlled by no one, but still desperate to keep her career afloat since post-war France was still recovering. Presumed Innocent is a brooding and thought-provoking, the legal thriller at its morally ambiguous best. Starring Harrison Ford, Brian Dennehy, Raul Julia director, Alan J. Pakula year, 1990 runtime, 126 minutes rating. Rotten Tomatoes score, 87%. Reservoir Dogs. After a jewelry store robbery gone wrong, the surviving criminals take refuge in a dilapidated warehouse. To hide their identities, most of them are known only by code names, Orange, White, Pink, and Blonde. Mr. Orange has been shot, and without medical attention, he'll bleed to death. The United States was popular, and other French singers had a lot of success playing in the country, so in 1947, Piaf set sail for a U.S. Mr. White is anxious to get him to a doctor, but the others overrule him. Tour. Upon her arrival in New York, she was met with disappointment for not being the typical star, not having the charisma and good looks the U.S.
They're more focused on one question. How did the police seemingly know they were coming? Is one of them an undercover cop? The volatile Mr. Blonde offers up one way to find out: torture the information out of an officer he's kidnapped. With accusations flying and tensions rising while they wait for their boss's arrival, something is bound to explode. Darkly comedic and punctuated by shocking acts of violence, you'll never hear, stuck in the middle with you, the same way again. Reservoir Dogs is a perfect dose of Tarantino's distinctive style. Starring Harvey Keitel, Tim Roth, Michael Madsen. Director, Quentin Tarantino. Year, 1992. Runtime, 99 minutes. Rating, R. Rotten Tomatoes score, 92%. 3 Days of the Condor. Joe Turner works for the CIA, but his job is fairly low-key. He examines books and other texts for clandestine political messages. It's not supposed to be dangerous. But one day, while Turner's out picking up lunch, his colleagues are murdered, and Turner is next on the hit list. Unsure he can trust anyone in the CIA, he goes on the run, trying to get to the bottom of the conspiracy. But with all the power on the other side, does Turner even have a chance? One of the best of the paranoid political thrillers, 3 Days of the Condor, is tense, well acted, and completely compelling. Starring Robert Redford, Faye Dunaway, Max von Sydow. Director, Sidney Pollack. Year, 1975. Runtime, 117 minutes. Rating, R. Rotten Tomatoes score, 87%. Wait until dark. Susie, who's still adjusting to her loss of sight, winds up accidentally, and unknowingly, in possession of a doll stuffed with heroin. The ruthless Harry Rote and his associates are after it, and they'll do whatever it takes to get it back. Had come to expect from Hollywood. At first, it seems like they'll be able to take advantage of Susie's blindness to fool her into handing over the doll, but once she realizes they've been lying to her, she decides to fight back. And Americans were not fans of being sad, one of Piaf's main charms. The movie then turns into a cat-and-mouse game where Susie must try to outwit the men targeting her and put them all on a level playing field. This every woman versus villains thriller is as inventive as it is suspenseful. Starring Audrey Hepburn, Alan Arkin, Richard Crenna. Director, Terrence Young. Year, 1967. Runtime, 107 minutes. Rating, TVPG. The wages of fear. With an oil well fire blazing, the Southern Oil Company needs to quell the flames with an explosion. The New York audiences did not turn out for her in the way she expected. According to AllMusic, just as she was about to leave the country, a prominent New York critic wrote a glowing review of her show, urging audiences not to dismiss her. It needs, in short, nitroglycerin. After the review, she received an 8-week run at the Café Versailles in New York, a club frequented by celebrities. It also needs men to transport it over hundreds of miles of rough road, when the jostling could easily trigger an explosion. She stayed in the U.S. for 5 months. The love of her life died in a plane crash. Edith Piaf had more lovers than she could count. After an affair with famous actor John Garfield in the U.S., she wrote in her journal, "I'm not meant to have a heap of lovers. At the end of each affair I'm more disgusted than ever. I'd like one true, wholesome love, via no regrets." It was at this time Marcel Cerdan arrived in New York for a match. Cerdan was a French boxer just as famous and beloved as Piaf. Due to the fact Cerdan was married with 3 children, they tried to hide their affair, though it made its way into the Parisian tabloids anyway. Both Piaf and Cerdan came from poor neighborhoods and respected each other's triumph over their struggle to create successful careers. According to KCRW, at the height of their love, Piaf penned the song, Hymne à l'amour, in September of 1949. The couple both traveled often for work and at times could continue their affair if they happened to be in the same place. 4 desperate men agree to drive the trucks, hoping to live long enough to collect the payoff at the end. But the journey is visceral and nail-biting, with danger around every corner, and only one thing is certain. This is going to be a grueling trip. Starring Yves Montand, Charles Vanel, Folko Lully. Director, Henri-Georges Clouzot. Year, 1953. Runtime, 148 minutes. Rating, TVMA. Rotten Tomatoes score, 100%. In 1949, Piaf was back in New York, and Cerdan was scheduled for a fight with Jake LaMotta. Cerdan planned on traveling by boat, but Piaf insisted he come by plane so they could spend more time together. Cerdan's plane crashed into the Azores. There were no survivors. Piaf was heartbroken. That night she sang at the Café Versailles. She told the audience, "Tonight I'm singing for Marcel Cerdan." A car crash led her to addiction. Edith Piaf was plagued with arthritis, which began around the time of Marcel Cerdan's death.
So by 1951, when she was in a car accident, she was already on a lot of prescription medication. She was driving with her new boyfriend, André Pousse, when he missed a turn, and they crashed with her breaking an arm and 2 ribs. She was prescribed morphine. According to No Regrets, Piaf wrote, "I was addicted, and I was earning millions. The drug dealers knew this and took advantage." She recalls seeing people entering her apartment and robbing her but being too weak to do anything about it. According to Everyday Health, By the mid-1950s, after several car accidents, her painkiller use had become an addiction. In addition to morphine, she drank more heavily. Always a drinker, as was the life of most nightclub entertainers, she was certainly drinking now as a means to kill the pain, both physical and emotional. She never recovered from the death of Certain. In fact, she hosted séances and kept whatever belongings she had of his as relics. Edith Piaf and her first husband divorced despite the litany of lovers. Edith Piaf had not yet married. In fact, when she met her soon-to-be husband Jacques Pils, she was in the midst of a relationship with famous French cyclist, Louis Girardin, whom she claimed she wanted to marry. According to The Independent, she ended things by sending him a letter that read, "When you receive this letter I will be married." Her relationship and marriage to Pils was abrupt. Pils, who was also a singer, wanted to work with Piaf on a song. They began rehearsing every day and, soon after, announced a tour together and their engagement. Piaf's lifestyle was anything but stable. According to No Regrets, Pils' sister, Simone, took care of Piaf. She retrieved cortisone for Piaf when she was in pain, stayed up with her when she couldn't sleep, made sure she was up by 1 p.m., and witnessed the numerous folks around Piaf borrowing money, flattering her, drinking with her, and endlessly partying. Piaf was in and out of rehab for morphine and alcohol. She was also in and out of the hospital for health problems. After the couple could no longer tour, being together became difficult, and Piaf did not like to be alone. She began an affair with lyricist Jean Drajac and traveled all of the U.S. with him. Upon her return to Paris, after traveling the U.S., Mexico and South America for a year, she and Pils divorced in 1956. Edith Piaf died of liver failure through her addiction and ailments. Edith Piaf continued to sing and attract crowds in her 40s. Her lover and fellow singer, Georges Moustaki, said of her when she was on stage, "She could breathe there, she was at home, she constructed her own world. If she felt ill in the wings, she felt better once she went on, via No Regrets." In 1959, she rushed off stage on 2 occasions, coughing up blood. A doctor said that she had a hemorrhaging ulcer from all the medicine she had been taking. She was hospitalized and lost a significant amount of weight. After that, she was in and out of hospitals but continued to perform publicly when she found the strength. During a recovery period in which she could not even sing, lyricist Michel Vauquer and the composer Charles Dumont played for her Non, Je ne regrette rien, which became one of her most famous songs. Although not her final recording, it certainly felt like a song that summed up her life that was coming to an end. Right before her death, and her decline in health was obvious, she married a young singer, Theophanes Lamboukis, who was 20 years younger than her. Dumont said of this union, "She wanted to do something mythic. To show right at the end, she embraced love, youth, beauty. It was hugely romantic." Piaf died of liver failure on October 10, 1963. She was 47 years old. She was denied a funeral mass by the Catholic Church after her death. One of her closest friends, Jean Cocteau, a world-famous French writer, said, "Edith Piaf burned herself up in the flames of her glory. I never knew anyone who was less protective of her spirit. She didn't dole it out, she gave everything away." Cocteau died the day after Piaf. Within 48 hours, France lost 2 of its greatest artists. The Catholic Church denied her a funeral mass because she divorced and remarried. Despite this, she had a pretty epic procession and display of fanfare following her death. According to the New York Times, about 100,000 persons lined up for hours to file past the bier. The day of her funeral, thousands of people lined the streets to see her hearse pass, and a group of 40,000 people watched her get buried at Père-Lachaise Cemetery in Paris, where many famous people such as Oscar Wilde and Eugene Delacroix are buried. According to the New Zealand Herald, 50 years after Piaf's death, on October 10, 2013, the Catholic Church decided to finally grant Piaf a formal mass. It was held at Saint Jean-Baptiste, the church she was baptized at in Belleville where Piaf grew up.
Her melancholic legacy lives on. Edith Piaf continues to be a national monument to all things French. In Paris, there is a street named after her, a bronze statue of her, and an entire museum dedicated to her life. According to Newsweek, the singer was not always glorified. During her life she was often vilified for her sexual liaisons, for breaking up marriages and drug abuse. For a long time after her death, her music was considered old hat. Somewhere in the 2000s, there was a renewed interest, and the singer's life and music became a celebrated national treasure again. In 2007, the biopic, Le Môme, La Vie en Rose, starring Marion Cotillard, certainly helped to bring the singer's legacy back into the world's imagination. Cotillard won an Oscar for her portrayal of Piaf. In 2015, on the 100th anniversary of her birth, the National Library of France held an exhibit in her honor. According to The Guardian, the library has amassed more than 400 exhibits including photographs, song sheets, handwritten notes, posters, some of them never before seen by the public, as well as film excerpts and musical recordings aimed at reminding visitors of the role the cabaret singer played in French cultural history and collective memory. Preserving her tragic and yet triumphant legacy has become an important venture to preserve French culture.